This is Surfing Through Cinema. I'm your host, Hawaii Harry. Today, I'll be discussing the next film for Cinephile Week. From Soviet-era director Sergei Bondarchuk, this epic movie is split into 4 different parts, totaling around 7 hours. Because of this, today I'll only be reviewing parts 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4 later on this month. This episode is all about War and Peace, parts 1 and 2 from 1966. Okay, so some technical details. So, first point, this is the most expensive film made in the Soviet Union. Although many say that, there are many different accounts of this that kind of show no one really knows how much it actually cost. Some speculate it would be equivalent to $700 million nowadays. Others say it'd be about 120. And so, regardless of the actual expense, it is still considered the most expensive movie made in the Soviet Union. Another technical detail. So for the sets and backgrounds, chandeliers, costumes, most of it was donated by local museums in Russia, and they were all from the 19th century. You know, they still had them lying around. And so that's why it has very authentic looking characters, and why all the costumes look so realistic is because they are real. Alright, so let's get into the plot. I kind of divided it up between the 2 parts. So I'll go over the first part, which is called Andrei Bolkonsky. He's the prince in this movie. So a man named Pierre, he befriends Prince Andrei. And Prince Andrei goes to war, and this is all taking place in the year 1805, and for any of my history fans out there, this is during when Napoleon was rising to power and invading in different parts of Russia and France and all around Germany. This is during the beginning of that. Prince Andrei, he witnesses the Battle of Schöngraben and Austerlitz. I'm not very good at speaking German, but these are major battles where there were significant losses from the Russian side versus the French side. And he's presumed dead. It even pans out with him laying on the ground looking as if he's dead. There's a horse in the background. So everyone, including the audience, believes he had been killed in battle. And so it cuts back to his home where he has a pregnant wife, and his family just can't bear telling her that he died. And so she starts to give birth to her child, and then at the last second, Andrei comes in, and it turns out he's actually alive. He survived the battle, but unfortunately, he comes a little too late. His wife dies during childbirth, and leaving him very depressed and very cold. And he meets up with Pierre again near the end of the film, and Pierre says, we got to find the happiness in life. And Andrei, he's pretty stern, pretty pessimistic, and yet he runs into the Rostova family where he meets Natasha, and he realizes there is beauty, there is still joy in this world. And that's where the film ends. That's where part 1 ends. Okay, now part 2 is called Natasha Rostova, who's the woman that Andrei runs into, and this takes place in the year 1809. So a couple years after the events of the other part. Natasha attends her first ball. She's 16 years old at this time, and she falls in love with Andrei. Pierre asks Andrei to go dance with her to make her feel good. This is her first dance, and she immediately falls in love with him, and vice versa. He falls in love with her. But he doesn't contact her for a few weeks, and she's worried maybe he forgot about her or moved on. And when they do see each other again, he says, we have to wait a year. We can't get married right now. And she's distraught, absolutely mad because she absolutely loves Andrei. She wants to get married right then and there. He feels she's not mature enough yet. And so they decide to wait a year. They don't really get engaged. It's more of a betrothal, more of a promise that they will get married. And so a few months later, Natasha runs into Anatol Kinegrin, and she falls in love with him. But he's very dangerously passionate for her, to the point of he wants to kidnap her just to have her with him. And she starts to fall for him. But I don't think it's out of love. I think it's more of the passion part, but also because she's confused and conflicted, and because she hasn't seen Andre for a while, so she's desperately needing that love and affection. Natasha's sister Sonia reveals the truth of what was going on to the owner of the place they were staying at, and they thwart Anatol's plans to take her away, and Natasha is super furious, but it is the good thing that they did. It's a good thing that they did that, because she was going crazy. And it cuts to a few weeks later. Andre, he hears about the situation, and he decides to call the whole thing off, and decides, you know what, it's not worth it. And Andre gives Pierre the letters that they've been writing back and forth to each other, and says, here, take these back to her. So Pierre does, and he tries to console and help Natasha feel better. And while doing so, he confesses his love for her. And the audience is shocked, as is Natasha. And that's where that one ends, on that cliffhanger. So that's the plot. That's parts 1 and 2. Again, I'll be reviewing 3 and 4 later on this month to finish up the storyline. But quite the cliffhanger, right? All right. So that's the plot for War and Peace parts 1 and 2. I'm going to go on a break real quick. But first, here's a message from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Here's how. It's totally free. There are tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer and even your cell phone. But that's not all. Anchor distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You could even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a complete podcast all in one small place. So go on and download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Okay, so we're back from our break. Now I'm going to get into some critical views and my personal views on War and Peace parts 1 and 2. The way critics view these movies, they don't view them individually, they kind of view them collectively, as all 4 of them together as one. So there's very few places where you can find what each individual film, which one gets more praise, which one doesn't. But nevertheless, the Academy Awards in 1969, after all 4 of them had been released, awarded it the Best Foreign Language Film of the Year. And up until 2017, with the American crime story O.J. Simpson, this was the longest movie, TV show, documentary, longest anything to have an Academy Award. And like I said, it clocks in around 7.5 hours long. And because of this, they did have to divide it up into 4 different movies. So yeah, the Academy gave it Best Foreign Language Film, and it was also nominated for Best Art Direction and Best Score. Roger Ebert, he says it's a magnificently unique film. Many critics like him, they love the atmosphere of it, they love the camera work, very unique dialogue, all of that. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has 100%, so many critics adore these movies, think they're the best ever. They are considered the best Russian movies of all time. Nothing comes close. Yeah, those are the critical views on War and Peace Parts 1 and 2. Now I'll get into my personal views. So, to give a little background, there was a Criterion flash sale recently, and this movie caught my attention because I loved the wide-angle shots, especially in the dance and ballroom scene, and the battle scenes. That really caught my attention, so I thought, I really want to watch this movie. And also, knowing that it's 7.5 hours long, I knew this would be a very long one to watch, but nevertheless, I still wanted to watch it. And because I bought the disc, I was able to watch Criterion for free for a month. And so, yeah, just watching these as much as I can. And I will say, the visuals of it are exactly how I thought they would be. They're fantastic. The dancing ballroom scene, like I said, is probably my favorite, especially in the Natasha Rostova one, where she and Andre are dancing the waltz. I think that's a very beautiful scene. The color aspect of it, the uniforms and the background, the scenery, all of that, the coloring in that, they look fantastic. They really feel they're from that era. And the setting itself, there's a scene in Natasha Rostova where it's actually snowing super hard outside. And just thinking about all the turmoil and craziness they had to go to make this movie is really, really admirable. And I think we kind of miss that nowadays with all these CGI heavy movies. Because these guys, they went all in. They recreated whole battle sequences as close as you could. The amount of attention to detail is phenomenal. Now, that being said, I think at some parts it was really hard to follow. Now, that may be due to the language barrier. I had to have subtitles on because it is all in Russian. I don't speak Russian. And on top of that, I've never read the book, so I don't know what the storyline is initially. I know a little bit about the history of the era, and so I have an idea of what's going on. But if you haven't read the book or know anything about it, I recommend doing some research first, because they say some things that would only make sense if you've read the book or if you knew what was going on in that era. And I think this is due to the fact that this was made in Russia, intended for Russian audiences, because it's a Russian book. So I think if you're a Russian patriot during the 1960s, you would probably have adored this film because you were very prideful of your history of it. But considering how I'm American, I don't know much about Russian history. I had a hard time following what was going on. Another thing I wasn't a huge fan of, some of the camera work was a little too experimental for me. This movie feels like it's supposed to be a period drama, but they did these really weird camera pans, and every once in a while there'd be these weird tints that they put onto the screen where it made it all blurry and dreamlike, especially in the sequence in Natasha Rostova where she's being followed by is it Alistar? What's his name? Anatole. When she's being followed by Anatole, it's a little strange and almost dreamlike. I felt that was a little too experimental for me. But other than that, I actually really like these movies. I'm very excited to finish the rest of the storyline. I hate the cliffhangers they keep leaving it on. I'd say I'd give them probably an 8 out of 10. I think, despite it being hard to follow with the language barrier and not knowing the history, and some of the experimental stuff's a little weird, I still give it an 8 out of 10. I think the acting is superb. I love the narration they do with the very poetic lines that I believe are directly from Tolstoy's book. So I really like that aspect of it. I think that adds a really nice touch to it. All right, so those are my thoughts and feelings on War and Peace Parts 1 and 2. Next time, I'll be discussing the next film for Classic Hollywood Week. Starring Peter O'Toole and Sir Alec Guinness, this episode is all about David Lean's classic film, Lawrence of Arabia. Alright, well until next time, this has been Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry. Take care. Thank you for listening to Surfing Through Cinema. Make sure to check us out on Facebook at Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry and on Instagram with Surfing Through Cinema. We also have a website, www.anchor.fm/Surfing Through Cinema, where you can learn more details on upcoming episodes and on past episodes.